The Tipu Sultan was the ruler of the Kingdom of Mysore in the southwest of India. Since 1775, at the age of 15, he had been fighting in India alongside his father against the increasing control of the British during the First Anglo-Mysore War. On the death of his father in 1782, he became the Sultan of Mysore. He won some significant victories against the British during the Second Anglo-Mysore War, which ended in 1784. He also fought in the conflict against the Central Indian Maratha Empire during the Maratha-Mysore War. However, the Third Anglo-Mysore War, which erupted in 1789, ended badly for him, where he lost a number of territories, including Malabar and Mangalore. To help with his continued struggle against the British, he appealed for support from the French via their island of Mauritius. The French general Napoleon Bonaparte, who was campaigning in Egypt, corresponded with him, promising him French military assistance. However, the governor of Mauritius dispatched to Mysore a force of only 100 men, while he issued a proclamation declaring French support for the Tipu Sultan against the British. When news of this proclamation reached the British, it became clear to them that the Tipu Sultan would not abide by any treaty and would therefore need to be removed from power, prompting the new Governor-General of India, Lord Mornington, to act quickly and decisively. British troop reinforcements were quickly dispatched from Gibraltar, South Africa and Portugal, and they formed a military alliance against the Tipu Sultan with the Nizam of Hyderabad. Mornington appointed General Harris as commander of the British Army, comprising of two separate British forces. The first force advancing from Madras, commanded by Harris, and the second force advancing from Bombay, commanded by General Stewart. They planned to mount a joint attack on the Tipu Sultan's fortress at Seringapatam, lying approximately in the centre of the Mysore territory on the river Kaveri, while the Nizam of Hyderabad's force would march southwards to join Harris's army. Meanwhile, the Tipu Sultan had advanced with a force of 12,000 men to attack Stuart's force, leaving a detachment of cavalry to keep an eye on Harris's advance. Due to the terrain of thick jungle, Stuart had divided his force of 6,400 men into 3 divisions, with his leading division at Sedresiya, and his other 2 divisions dangerously strung out at least 8 miles further back. On the morning of the 5th of March, a British scouting party observed a large encampment, alerting them to the presence of Tipu Sultan's force. Later that morning, the Tipu Sultan's troops advanced through the jungle and attacked the leading British division from the front and rear. The British put up a determined defence and were very near to being overwhelmed when Stuart's division arrived in mid-afternoon, and after several hours of fierce fighting was able to repel the Tipu Sultan's attack. The Tipu Sultan's casualties at Sedresiya were around 1,500 killed and wounded, while the British casualties were around 140 killed, wounded and missing. Meanwhile, by the 27th of March, Harris had advanced towards Malvali, where he met a force of the Tipu Sultan's cavalry deployed to their right, with Mysorean infantry positioned on the heights beyond the village. The British infantry in their centre advanced towards them. Led by Arthur Wellesley, later the Duke of Wellington, and brother of Mornington, the Governor-General, which first halted the enemy with volley fire, then broke them with a bayonet charge, with cavalry support. Meanwhile, on the British right flank, the Mysorean cavalry were halted and broken by determined British volley fire. British casualties at Malavalli were around 70 killed and wounded, while the Tipu Sultan's casualties were around 1,000 killed and wounded. The following day, Harris resumed his slow advance towards Seringapatam, which he reached on April the 5th. On the 5th of April, Harris's force deployed to the southwest of Seringapatam, protected by an aqueduct. The following day, Wellesley, commanding the Scotch Brigade, drove the Mysoreans from their positions on the opposite side of the aqueduct. Stuart's force finally arrived at Seringapatam on the 14th of April, bringing the British Army's total strength up to around 50,000. Harris then discovered that his army's supply of rice was significantly less than first believed, causing him to hasten his siege of the fortress. Harris planned to bombard its northwest corner, causing a breach, by which his troops could capture Seringapatam. On the 16th of April, Stuart's force crossed the low-level River Cavery to its north bank. The following day, they captured the village of Agara, and that night a battery was established near to the village that began to fire on the northwest corner of the fortifications. Meanwhile, on the south bank, the British had forced the Mysore troops further back to positions behind the Little Cavery. They established an advanced post from which they dug a trench, enabling their troops to advance up to the Little Cavery under cover. They established a battery at the end of this trench. The Tipu Sultan's troops were now deployed behind an entrenched line on the south bank of the Cavery, parallel to the fortress wall. They were now under bombardment from British guns on the north bank of the river and those at the end of the trench. On the evening of the 20th of April, the British seized a powder mill on the south bank of the river, which enabled them to dig a further trench between the Little Cavery and the main river, and establish a further battery, enabling them to fire on the northwest corner of the fortress walls. Meanwhile, on the 22nd of April, on the north bank, while the British were preparing to establish a further battery, they were attacked by Mysore troops, which was repelled. On the evening of the 26th of April, Wellesley commanded an attack on the Mysorean entrenchments. The trenches were quickly taken, but the British troops came under heavy fire from the circular redoubt at the end of the line. This was soon captured by British troops, with the troops from the redoubt being pursued across the bridge onto Seringapatam Island. The British casualties during this attack were around 300. The following morning, the British began building new batteries in the captured entrenchments. On the 2nd of May, the new British batteries in the captured entrenchment began their bombardment, and by the evening of the 3rd of May, the breach was considered viable for an attack. In command of the British attack was General Baird, who had been a prisoner of the Tipu Sultan in Seringapatam for a number of years, and as a result knew the layout of the fortress. The attacking force of around 4,800 men was in position in the trenches by dawn on the 5th of May. The attack began at 1 p.m. Hoping to catch the garrison off guard during the hottest part of the day. The British crossed the river, and as it was at its lowest level of the year, it was only between ankle and waist deep. The British began to come under heavy artillery, rocket and musket fire. However, rubble from the British bombardment had filled the ditch before the breach, making it easier to cross, enabling the British to move quickly onto the outer ramparts. They divided their attacking force into two sections, with one section attacking along the outer ramparts to the left and the other to the right, with each section being followed by Mysorean troops on the inner ramparts. The attacking British troops were faced with a wide ditch between the outer and the inner ramparts. However, a party of British soldiers discovered an unguarded ramp between the northern outer and inner ramparts, and were soon across. The defending Mysorean troops were slowly forced back. This slowly turned into a rout as they attempted to escape. The Tipu Sultan attempted to reach his palace, and while doing so, was killed. Meanwhile, the British troops on the southern outer rampart met little resistance, and pursued the Mysore troops as they attempted to flee from the fortress. As the resistance collapsed, the British troops rampaged through the fortress. General Baird sent a flag of truce to the Tipu Sultan's palace, ordering him to surrender. On being informed that the Tipu Sultan had been killed, Baird began to search for his body, which was found by British troops and given a ceremonial burial the next day. British losses at the Siege of Seringapatam were around 1,400, while the Mysorean casualties were estimated at around 6,000.